Often when they walk into a design workshop, their notion is that I'm going to have to pick up a pencil and a paper and it's going to be really difficult and I can't do this, so I'm just going to sit in the corner and say my 2 cents and not really participate in the entire journey building process. So there are many great warm-up exercises out there, and I have personally tried a bunch in a lot of workshops where I want people to open up and sort of start participating. But there are two which have stuck with me and I find myself repeatedly using these. So the first one is actually a barrier breaking exercise, and I tend to use it more in multifunctional teams and teams which are filled with business level participants. And most often when they walk into a design workshop, their notion is that I'm going to have to pick up a pencil and a paper and it's going to be really difficult and I can't do this, so I'm just going to sit in the corner and say my 2 cents and not really participate in the entire journey building process. So they come in with their anxieties and their difficulties in expression. So one exercise that I often do with them is right at the start of the workshop, hand them over a pencil and a paper and tell them if they are somebody who aren't confident about drawing, let's take a test and see. And how this test goes is you basically start with a pencil and paper, and I as a facilitator will call out certain common words that they are nouns or adjectives that they need to draw. So a few examples of these would be have them draw a baby, or have them draw a folder, a television, or an ice cream. All of these drawings have a certain nuance to it. No matter how scratchily or unesthetically you draw these little creatures, you will realize that most of our drawings are very similar to each other. As you can see in the specimen that I'm showing, most of us draw a baby like this with a circle and a little curl of a hair on top. There isn't actually a baby out there who has a curled single hair on their head, but we all realize these as notional visuals. And at the end of this exercise, you allow each other to pass their paper to their next person and take a look. And what everybody realizes is that even though they're not good at aesthetically presenting a drawing, what they're good at is expressing and communicating what they're trying to show on the paper. So I'm able to look at this paper and say that this is a baby and this is a television, and which in fact is enough in a design workshop. You don't need to know great drawing. What you need to know is a way to pick up the paper and express your ideas. And this helps the people in the room break their barrier and actually get in the mood of creating and not holding back and sitting in a corner. So this was one barrier breaking exercise. The second one I really like is it's called yes and. So yes and is an exercise I often do with the designer groups, where before they get into ideation, we do this 5-minute exercise where you pair people into groups of twos and you have them do a story building exercise in which they are not permitted to use words like but, no, although, etc. All the negative words are out in the bin. They have to compulsorily start a sentence with yes and. How this basically helps is it helps you build on top of the next person's idea without disagreeing with them. And it's very essential to come into an ideation room with this sort of a notion in mind. You don't want to give the opposite person a negative impact by saying but when you listen to their idea. It's actually very impactful for the person who has just presented with their fears involved. They've presented an idea and you've said, but did you think about that? And that's not a good behavior in a collaborative room. So it's essential to make everybody feel comfortable. And in this exercise, you start each of your sentences with yes and it then instills that level of confidence, and that fear of participation is completely taken away from you. So this is a great question. In fact, a lot of product owners and designers struggle with the fact that we're sitting on a bank of ideas and a lot of these are good ideas. How do we decide which ones to plug in when? And firstly, when you're planning an MVP, for example, it's very essential to pick the most impactful ideas. So for this, I always recommend using an impact and feasibility matrix. Now this matrix has 4 quadrants like any matrix. You'll see this on the screen above. You start with the most impactful ideas and the least impactful ideas on your y-axis. On your x-axis, you basically have the least feasibility and the most feasibility. So when you look at the first quadrant that we're seeing on the left hand side top, it's the most feasible and the most impactful idea. Now, these are the ones you definitely want to build right away. So based on your user research and all the user insights that you have, you've understood that these features are going to help your users the most. So this is something, this is your key. You must build these features, so to say. Then when you go slightly on the below part of the quadrant on the left hand side, you see that there are ideas which are feasible, but they're not very impactful. At this point, you need to decide whether you're going to actually implement these. And to make this decision easy, you need to answer 2 questions. Are your competitors providing these features? And are these hygiene features? So if your competitors are doing this, you don't have any reason to skip them. You must do them as well, just to stay afloat and to match to that extent. And also if they're hygiene features, even though they're not impactful, they will add to the experience because the user is used to using them. So that's how you decide that. Now let's look at the right hand side of the quadrant, and we'll start with the right hand side bottom, which is the least feasible and the least impactful idea. And these are the ones you definitely want to skip. One, from the perspective that feasibility is mainly to do with tech capabilities, budget issues, business viabilities, and at this decision point, you definitely don't want to force your product to have wait too early in the journey when you're not even sure whether this product is going to stay well in the market. So these are the ideas you definitely want to skip. And the last one, which is they're impactful but they're not feasible. This is usually a tough decision, and this decision often depends on budget and tech constraints. These most often will also be your innovative ideas. So you don't want to completely ignore these. You want to backlog these. You want to think about them very soon in the future, but you don't want to do them right away.